Feels hard to follow that, but also I felt like it led right into what we're talking about, which is participatory art in action. And we were just engaging in participatory art, so we had an embodied experience of that. My name is Jen Berger, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what our session looks like, and then I'm going to pass it to Brian, so it's great. So we're going to spend the first 20-ish minutes going over each of our practices, sharing some examples of our work that fits into this topic, and then we're going to have a little dialogue. We've kind of curated some questions to ask each other to talk about, and so you can kind of to generate some ideas and thoughts. And then there's going to be an opportunity for us to engage with you, so we'll have a dialogue with the audience as well. And then at the end of that, we'll have about 20 minutes to do some hands-on activities. So there's 3 activity tables back here. You can pick 1, you can pick 2, you can pick 3, but we're taking something from our practices that we're talking about and giving you a chance to participate. And that is kind of the overview. So I'm going to pass this to Eve.
Yeah, I'm going to get started. My name is Brian Collier. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, and I'm a professor of art and design at St. Michael's. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks obviously to Jen and Eve, whose idea this was to do this panel, so thank you so much. Would have been doing it. So for over 25 years, I've been making work about ecology of the built environment and the impacts of human activity on our shared ecosystems. I'm interested in revealing these often unknown natural histories and finding connections between humans and the other animals and plants we live with. So because of this goal of helping people find connection, primarily to the natural world, I use participatory strategies in most of my projects, which I first experimented with in this project from back in 2004 called the Collier classification system for very small objects. This project was designed to get people to notice the little overlooked things that fill our world while collectively helping build an archive of very small objects collected and named using a new taxonomic system that I invented. It's a kind of a silly language system. So each time I exhibit the project, I set up these naming stations where visitors can follow simple instructions to select and name their own very small object, which they can then submit to a master collection. So I was really interested in this project being generated by a collaborative public as an ongoing effort. So after I collected the first 120 specimens, when I was developing the project, I stopped collecting and naming myself at all, and I only accepted objects that were collected and named from participants. So this is an ever-expanding project that is ongoing. It exists as a traveling museum now, which has a master collection specimen cabinet, which holds more than 600 specimens at this time, large frame photos, hand-bound catalog, and the naming stations, of course. And this is just a detail of what the specimens look like in the collection. So this idea of garnering participation as a way of noticing and connecting to the natural world was core to this project, which was a later project called Teach the Starlings. So the idea for this was to take advantage of the fact that European starlings can mimic human speech to have participants help me teach all the introduced starlings in North America, somewhere around 200 million, to say the name of the man primarily responsible for introducing them here. His name is Eugene Schieffelin. So to do this, I would lead tours, mostly in urban environments, to teach people how to find and identify them in urban spaces, and then we would all collectively shout, "Schieffelin!" at them as many times as we could over and over until they either flew away or we got bored. So I lived in Illinois for more than a decade, and during this time I did a series of projects exploring small fragments of the natural environment that comprise most of what they call nature in that part of the world. A lot of people don't know that, especially here, but it's actually 49th out of the 50 states in the US in terms of remaining natural area. Iowa is the worst, has the least amount of remaining natural area. So during this time...
So Vermont is the next least?
No. Iowa?
Iowa.
Yeah, Illinois is 49th, Iowa is 50th in terms of just everything being wiped out. So during this time I discovered seed balls, which are a highly effective way to disperse and grow native plants in a variety of environments. And I did a number of workshops and seed ball distribution projects, starting back in around 2007, and I still do those today. So the distribution of these seed balls, some people call them seed bombs, anywhere there is a patch of ground that's not going to be mowed, or where mowing can stop, helps participants have an active role in making their local environment more biologically diverse and ecologically beneficial. So I do these workshops. This is the workshop that I'm doing with you all today, if you want to participate in that. Moving on, this is a project that I started in 2014. A very large-scale project called Unlawning America to garner participation in transforming unused moat areas into ecologically beneficial meadow habitat. I launched the project at Burlington City Arts in partnership with Shelburne Farms. And at the farms, I convinced them to stop mowing patches throughout the campus. Most of those have since been mowed over, but they do have some no-mow areas that they've increased there. To garner further participation, I also designed these unlawning kits, which people can use to create their own unlawed meadow habitat. And I've sent these all over the country, and there's people doing this activity all around. Last October, I was invited by the Current in Stowe to be artist in residence for an international program called ARCA, which was in the Abruzzo region of Italy, designed to enrich communities through the arts. And I was assigned to live and work in this little town of 350 people called Fontecchio, which was amazing. I developed a project for the residency that I called Our Personal Nature, which is a community-generated portrait about participants' relationship with the ecology of that place. So the project started as 3 separate workshops, one on really thinking and talking about their ideas of nature and ecology and the natural world. Then we moved on to a second workshop where we walked as a group through the town and we looked for objects of nature, elements of the natural world, or representations of nature, and they sort of took photographs and collected specimens. And then we moved on to the third workshop where they took all these items, photographs, writing, whatever, and we collectively generated artworks that I then assembled and curated into an exhibition in this multi-use space called the Palazzo Galli. It's a palace, but this wasn't really a palace, just a big house. Pretty impressive house, though. So I designed the installation to be a complex multi-sensory experience combining sort of a broad overview, macro view, with many intimate moments for visitors to explore the artworks and ideas. Yeah. So the final project I'll talk about is my newest, which I'm very happy that I got a Vermont Arts Council grant for. Thank you, Vermont Arts Council. It's just getting started. I've been working on it for about a year. It's called Essential Strangers. And I use drawing, sculpture, photography, video, and design to raise awareness of the importance of wild native bees and propose strategies to help slow their declining numbers. The primary participatory element here, I designed these bee habitats, native bee habitats. There's 3 different sizes, so individuals or communities can use them to create sites to provide food, shelter, and nesting habitat for native bees, which are slightly different than honeybees. I also designed a sign that accompanies the habitat with just some basic information on it. And the idea is that these sites can provide a focused location to observe native bees with all the things that they need. But also it can be used, and I've been working a lot with scientists, it can be used as a site for citizen science to generate much needed research and monitoring for these vitally important animals. So thank you. With that, I'll pass it over to Eve.
So I'm Eve Jacobs-Carnahan, and I'm based in Montpelier, and I'm going to talk to you about my Knit Democracy Together project, which uses art or craft to attract people to an educational program. And it encourages community engagement and hopefully motivates people toward action. So these are gatherings of crafters who come together to make pieces of a collaborative sculpture of their state capital while deepening their understanding of the electoral process. As I said, my goal is education. I want people to recognize misinformation, understand vulnerabilities in the electoral system, and move toward voter protection. The setting is a comfortable gathering of knitters. Like, you don't have to have any experience or like activist sense. You could just be, I kind of like yarn and this sounds really cool and I'm gonna come, and it's okay because I can talk to people about knitting and yarn, and it's also okay in that setting to be quiet and not speak. You can just be kind of hanging out. And that can create a commonality and a comfort for discussion. So in the time of the hour or so circle, people have time to make a rectangle knitted or crocheted 4 by 6 inches that will be a piece of the sculpture. And they are given agency to use relatively speaking, like a stone color. You know, they can sort of choose a color of what they're going to yarn, and then they can do any kind of stitch that they want. And this means that all the pieces in the end have the individual mark of the maker. They're all separately identified, but they come together into something that's larger than it could be made by one person. So again, so it's a metaphor for democracy, that all these things are coming together, people working together to make something larger than themselves. And just to give you a sense of the size, this is 5 feet wide, 3.5 feet tall, 3 feet deep, and this one is loosely based on the Vermont State House.
Wow.
So one of the reasons I was drawn to this topic of democracy is because before I was a full-time artist, I was a lawyer for the state of Vermont, and I did a lot of electoral work. So there is a presentation aspect to the sessions, as well as a discussion aspect. So some of the topics that I discuss and that we talk about are things that relate to what state legislatures can control, because we're building a state legislative building, such as voter ID rules that vary from state to state, power of state legislatures to gerrymander, and how amazingly you can really control the results by different ways you draw the district lines. We talk about how our system, most of our voting systems in the United States are a plurality system, not a majority system, but there are jurisdictions, cities, and some states, especially in primaries, they use different systems, top 2 primary, top 4 primary, ranked choice voting, like in Burlington, proportional representation, so people can start talking about those differences. And there's always somebody in the room who has lived in a place that used one of these other systems, and we'll talk about it. And of course, we talk about the Electoral College. So I started the project in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, but amazingly that meant that I could use Zoom to collaborate with people in other places. This is an Illinois state capital. I collaborated with the Windy City Knitting Guild on Zoom and a yarn shop in Chicago. I also collaborated with the Rochester, New York Public Library. Collaboration is so key to doing any kind of big project like this. You need the other organizations to have the outreach, to give you the space, to connect to their followers, to bring you in. So collaboration is something I've been learning, developing. It's really important for this kind of project. So this is the finished Vermont State House on display in the Vermont State House, where what I did was take the sculpture and make other opportunities for more conversation in other ways. So here we are putting together the lawn and gardens around the State House with another opportunity with discussion questions at the tables. I also did the project in New Hampshire with New Hampshire Humanities, and they arranged for me to go to middle schools as well as evening adult spaces. And it was cool to go to a middle school that was a Waldorf school where the kids knew how to knit, but also at most of the schools they didn't know how to knit, and I brought knitting spools for for the students to make yarn cords. Changed the topics for them. The topic they really got into was when I said, you know, there's some communities where 17-year-olds can vote. And what do you think about that? That was great discussion. And we talked about what are the state reps, what do they do, what's their role, what's town meeting, things like that. Oh, and like who's eligible to vote. So then we took that finished State House to be on display at the State Library in Concord, New Hampshire. And there again, used the sculpture to attract people to come, and they got to see a voting rights exhibition that we borrowed from the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History that told the whole history of different groups achieving suffrage at different times. And we also had a special event with a film and a speaker about the 26th Amendment when 18-year-olds got the right to vote. And this culminating, oh, what did I just do? Okay, this culminating event also gave me a chance to interact again with people who had made pieces of the sculpture. And it was just very heartening to hear people come up to me and say how excited they were, how touched they were to have made something that became something bigger, and how at a time of stress and hopelessness, they felt like they were empowered in some small way. And I really hoped that they also had learned things that had made them empowered and moved on. And so the activity that I brought today is that the next year after doing this project, I took the New Hampshire State House on another, speaking to lots of different speakers, and the activity was to make yarn citizens. And so you're going to be able to make yarn citizens. In that case, it was to populate the State House. You can take these home.
Great. I broke this presentation up into two areas, participatory installations and community engagement, and really thinking about pulling projects that look at the multiple ways that we can engage with people. This first one here, there it goes, okay. This first one here is from 2015. There was a symposium, UVM, called Feverish World. It was a combination of art and academic activities that people could participate in, and they created or gave us enough wood that we could make these tents. They kind of created a tent city on campus, and everybody was able to create a tent in whatever work they were doing. And so I worked with Gabrielle Stanza, and we actually were really interested in the idea of getting off campus. We really wanted people in Burlington to be able to participate. And so we were able to put ours up at Fletcher Free Library, so really anybody could participate. So you see this here. And what we did is there was a really great interview with Naomi Klein talking about capitalism, corporatism, and the environment. And so we painted the inside of the tent with gesso and had headset. People could listen to the interview, and then we asked them to respond. We had paint and markers and things so they could respond, and so the inside became almost graffitied with responses to that podcast. This is a piece from 2021. It's called The Opposite of Hate is Mending. Oh, it didn't record. Oh, it did. Okay. There we go. And this was, so this was in April of 2021. And if you remember that time, it was kind of, we had maybe just gotten our first vaccine. Joe Biden had just gotten elected. We were kind of, in April, East Burlington, a lot of us were coming out and seeing each other for the first time in a really long time. And I was really thinking about, coming out of, but then felt like a dark time, still feels like a dark time again. What do we need to do to move forward? And the idea of mending versus fixing felt really important. And so what this is here is, it's a wooden quilt. So I was able to take quilt squares and put them on a laser cutter and cut them out. And then I invited people who were there to write on the back up to 3 words about what they needed or what we thought was important for mending moving forward. And then there was, you can kind of see on the left-hand side here, there's live musicians, and then there's 3 dancers here. And what they did was they braided, through dance, they braided together binding, ended up being the binding. And then while they were playing music, I put together all of the squares, and we created this quilt that was able to stay in public space for quite a long time. So that's that one. This was around the same time. I was really questioning, I think a lot of us were really questioning community, thinking about the role of institutions, right? We're kind of like, again, just unraveling and reckoning. And so I created different questions. I came up with different questions that were looking at art institutions, government institutions, thinking about the role of community, thinking about the isolation we felt during COVID. And so the first, the first photo on the left here is I hung all of them up. There was 12 of them, and I hung them up during the art comp, and I put them up on outside Moscone Bank on Pine Street so that people could contemplate these questions. And then the second one is on the right-hand side later that year in October. I placed them around Oak Ledge Park and invited people to go on a contemplative walk. We walked to the park, and then at the very end we met just by the waterfront and had a conversation about some of the ways that people were experiencing this text. So in 2024 I had a residency at the Generator Makerspace, and I created a prototype. It was called What Was It Before It Was Gone? And what this is one of the things I've been thinking a lot about. We heard about this morning, is the idea of grief. And so we all kind of had, I'm sure we've all experienced personal grief. But what does it mean to experience social, political, and ecological grief? And how do we recognize that and acknowledge that and make sense of that different and similar to our personal losses? And so I wanted to create a prototype of what would it look like if I was able to create something in public space. So this is kind of right off of the path next to the generator, and you'll see on the left side, you'll see there's 4 altars on one side. Each of those is pointing to a different aspect of COVID, thinking about isolation, death, illness, and just kind of a lot of confusion. There's one, the one that has the close-up, was thinking specifically around the loss of Roe, thinking about some of the racial inequities that were happening. And so I mirrored social movement posters from, like, historically with current headlines. And so you would see the same topic, and just thinking about the movements and the work that people did, and then the losses that we were experiencing. And then the one that you don't see was one about ecological losses. And you can kind of tell in the bigger ones, each one has a poem related to the topic that's carved in. And so the intent with this is that I feel it's really important to be able to name what's happening, and from that naming we can experience the grief, which we did this morning also. And I think when we don't process or name our grief, it builds up. And so when we're able to name that, especially in community, thinking about communal grieving, communal loss, doing it in public spaces together, that gives us more capacity to move forward and to do work in our communities and together. So that was the intent of this piece here. This was the Over Dinner series. How do we go back here? Okay. This was something I created in 2019, and I continued it through the beginning of the pandemic online, and then it wasn't working. And this idea was to invite people who had a specialty in areas related to social change, or art, or business, or just anything that was empowering and giving us a chance to take action. Invite them to dinner. And so I work in a shared studio, we have a common space, and either I would hire somebody or I'd make dinner myself and invite people to come. And we would just sit around the table. The person who was bringing in their experience would share that, and then we would have a conversation. And what I was really trying to do is, if you think about it, you go see a speaker with your friends, and then you go grab a drink or get dinner afterwards and you talk about it. And that's kind of, for me, where the meat happens, right? Where you really digest that, pun intended. Here's some of the topics. Because let's just cut that out and just sit together and talk. And so we did. We sat around and we talked about these topics. And maybe I'll do it again, but it was something I tried to continue doing online, and it was, mildly successful, and then not so much. This was a mural. This is a mural. I got a grant from BCA's Community Art Grant in 2019. To do a series of murals the summer of 2020. Right, exactly. And so I was like, oh, okay, this maybe isn't happening. And so they were really helpful and great, and we had lots of conversations about how to reimagine this project. And so the idea was that it was going to be using community engagement. The murals were going to be highlighting people in our community. And that was something I couldn't do. And so what I ended up doing was using online, either through Facebook or email, or I had created a survey that people could share their experiences the first 2 months of COVID in our neighborhood. And so I compiled all of that information and created a visual to explain that. And so there was a lot of constraints on this. One was time, and then obviously there was COVID, illness, and then also I had to very quickly find a space to do this. And so it's been changed. This was on the wall next to Sangha Studio on North Winooski in the old north end of Burlington. You'll see things like, if you remember, but when we were having graduation, there was caravans. We started seeing an increase of deliveries, UPS trucks, things like that. The top part where there's flowers was the name of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and some other folks, just remembering those losses at that time. And then embedded in the rainbow. The rainbow came up a lot as far as the idea of hope. People really like the idea of the rainbow and hope. And then embedded in there are things like people calling unemployment, or thinking about people baking bread, or like lots of things that were happening. So those images were embedded in the rainbow, and then there was a huge thank you to our medical staff, or medical people, for all the work that they were doing. And then the text is on the mask. And then lastly, is the postcard project, which is an ongoing project. So around Valentine's Day in 2024, I was feeling particularly hopeless and particularly powerless with all of the changes that were going on in the world. And I was really struggling. I have a background in community organizing, so the idea that I was really struggling to figure out what to do was like really uncomfortable. And so I was really thinking about how, if I felt powerless, where is there power? And I was like, well, there's people in power. Like, there's some good people who are trying to really work hard. And so I said, let's support the people in power to work with the other people in power who are the ones that we're fighting against. And so this was the first iteration. This was held at Lil's Standing Stone in Winooski, and so I created this block. I do a lot of printmaking, and so it says roses are red, violets are blue, I love fill in the blank, and I hope you do too. And so people filled it in, and we also came with a list of different bills that were up right then, or different topics, so people could either put the name of the topic or the name of the bill, and then in the back they would write something about it, and then we sent them in to the legislator. This is Representative Troy Hedrick got one of these and put it on his Instagram. He was so thrilled to get it. He was also saying, like, people were really jealous, and he's like, if you keep doing this and sending it to people that you like, then people really want them, and so maybe they'll do the work to get a postcard. So like, I was like, okay, that's great. And so that turned into this postcard project. So I started making lots of different fronts, and then you can see on the right-hand side, the back, and basically I created these kits that people could buy and then send postcards to the representatives. And that's the project we're working on today, is you'll have a chance to print your own postcard.
I'm starting off, so
Okay.
that sounded way louder than I expected. So we're going to ask each other some questions to get the Q&A session going, basically. So I will begin. So this is for Jen to start off. What role do you see your work playing in effectuating social change?
So yeah, I was really been rolling this around. I mean, I think first off is I try to make an effort to make it accessible, and I think that is just the baseline of. I think we live in a world where accessibility is really difficult, and there's lots of challenges that people have that we see and we don't see, and so just trying to create things that are accessible. I think, like I said earlier, there's also the opportunity for naming what's going on and being able to, from that place, have more capacity to take action. And then there's a lot of projects that I haven't included that are more action-oriented. The postcard project is one, and so I really am thinking about the action part, who we're talking to, but also like our humanity in that, and like our role of what we need to do to be able to participate fully in creating social change.
Thank you.
This one is for Brian. In what ways do you foster collective action through your projects?
So I think about this continuously, because the projects that I devise are intended to be scalable and cannot happen without large-scale participation. So how do you get people to participate? People are scared to touch things in an art environment usually, or to do things, right? So you have to break that barrier. I use a lot of humor, as you can see from that one project, Shouting Schieffelin, people, to just get them to be aware and connect with these kind of things. Well, the other thing is, most of the work I deal with, speaking about grief and loss, is ecological and environmental issues. Let me tell you that I spend a lot of time thinking about the bleak situation we're in right now. But you cannot present that to people directly because they shut down emotionally. So how do you bridge that gap, right? So I have found all these different little ways to get, you use a sense of wonder, you use beauty, you use some of the creativity of art, you use humor, to kind of give people moments of agency. If you can make people think that they can do something, even if small, it's a way to overcome these overwhelming feelings of, I can't do anything. Like you talk about issues of climate change. Climate change is huge. What the hell do we do? I don't know, but you can plant something in your yard. You can create a habitat, you can focus on a particular animal, whatever, right? So those are some of the ways. So I just always try to find easy entry paths to create really complex projects in a way that people can engage with them on all different sort of levels. So I guess the core of that is giving people an easy path to a sense of agency to affect change.
Eve, this one's for you. How directly do you try to educate your audience or participants in the underlying subject matter of your project?
So the education is one of my main goals, because I think if you understand things, then you can do something about them. But kind of a little bit the way Brian was just saying, you can't just bombard people with bad news and what's happening. So hopefully by creating this common fun setting of the knitting, there's this other reason to come together, and then it makes it a more comfortable gathering space. And I set up seats in a semicircle or have everybody around a table, trying to create comfort zones that way. First 15 minutes of every session is the get your yarn, talk about what kind of thing we're making, that kind of connection thing to make people connect. And some groups are really into discussion and some aren't. It just sort of depends on the dynamic in the room. But when there is discussion, there's always somebody very knowledgeable there, because of the topic, there's almost always somebody who has been a poll worker or who has worked in an election office, or they are actively volunteering in some way. And so you start to get these examples of people talking about what they're doing and people asking each other questions. The other thing I always do as an educational piece is have a handout, which I eventually turned into also a shared Google Doc so that people could go to it later, that has further resources for websites to go to, articles, books, podcasts, and try to get people to continue their experience. Okay, I have a question for Jen. How do you break down barriers, be they social or emotional or skill-based, to participation in your projects?
I mean, I guess that goes back to the point about accessibility. And I think, I'm also a teacher, and so I think a lot about when people are participating in an assignment or a project, and we have this idea of what it's supposed to look like. And if we can get rid of that, and we can just have the experience of that, and not worry about whether it looks good or what it looks like, the turnout of that. And so then you can have an experience, whether it's like learning a technique or understanding a process, but also I think there's a beautiful diversity in the product that comes out, and not everybody looks the same. When I'm thinking about some of the projects I shared with you, I'm really thinking about these are kind of shared experiences. These are human experiences. Sometimes they're geographically specific. Sometimes they're just human experiences. And so in that, I'm hoping that everybody can find themselves. Even if you don't agree with something, I think you can still, somewhere in your body, admit there's ecological grief and ecological loss. Even if you don't believe in climate change, you know somewhere, right? So just to say that, like, maybe that was an extreme, but just saying that I'm really thinking about, the human connection. And then, I don't know if it wasn't part of this question, but I also just want to share that I'm really hyper-aware that economics can play a role in barriers to creating art, to participating in art. I see this a lot in the States, I see this a lot in the country. I live in Winooski, I see it quite a bit there, and so really kind of finding ways, and I have to say there's been so much increase in support from grants, which makes that so much easier to be able to provide free or low-cost opportunities for people, so I'm really grateful for that. But in general, just really brainstorming all the different ways that we might have barriers and trying to find ways to break that down. And then there are projects I do that maybe don't have those barriers, but I know that they're with people who maybe have more funds or more resources, and so then I can kind of balance that out. So those are things I think about.
So Brian, in what type of venues have you held your projects, and what type of groups have you collaborated with?
So I have worked a lot in galleries, museums. I really love working with public institutions. I like working with galleries and educational institutions because they're really open to these kind of experimental practices. I intentionally, aside from a brief flirtation with commercial galleries early in my career, I do not work with commercial galleries because I am not interested in the core of my work being a product for sale. Right? I want to affect change, I want to get participation. So I had this I showed you the experience in Fontecchio, Italy, which was amazing working with the community there, coming in. So I want to get people to kind of have the idea that they can make change in their own spaces. So working with all these spaces, I have an opportunity to work with people who are open to these ideas, working with, again, spaces that are affiliated with education in particular, and then going out into their community and doing those things. I also work in a lot of public spaces all the time. Early in my career, I did a lot of guerrilla-style environmental activities where I would not ask permission, I would just go out and do some things. I am a responsible adult now, as a professor and working for a college, so I can't do that stuff as much anymore because people actually pay attention to what I'm doing in work. So it's interesting, right? Because when I work with my students, I try to give them the sense of agency and power that they can just go out and do stuff. You can just go out and do stuff, you know? Sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. With responsibility, right? I teach, you have to be very responsible and conscious about how you do that. So I have the impulse to just want to go and do stuff, but I have to restrain myself a little. So now I've developed these projects that have that structure built into them. It's sometimes really frustrating to get permission and to work with communities and sit on panels and boards and all those kind of things. But it works a little bit. And I have, where I live in Heinsberg, I have a big testing ground, and St. Michael's has been really generous with some of their the property that they own for me to just go and do these things as experiments with students. So you find your places, and you work, both within the institution and outside the institution, and you can do a lot of exciting things.
So how are we doing on time?
Good. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the last question for Eve. In what ways do you try to assess the impact your projects have on people?
So this is always really challenging, but sometimes when you get a grant, you have to account for the impact in some way, and I, kind of as an analytical person, sort of want to know. So I've devised things that may or may not be that strong, but what I've done is I've usually had a survey, either a handout or a follow-up email after the sessions to ask people certain bullet point questions that were related to the session. So as a result of the session, do you go and read or research any follow-up topics? Have you subscribed to support some journalism source, some media source? Are you sharing information you learned with a friend? Are you volunteering or donating to a voter protection group? Are you volunteering now as a poll worker at a local election? Sort of things like that, which have two purposes, frankly. One is to nudge people towards those things, and also to see if any of them are thinking, I might just do that because I heard Susie talk about how she did that at the session and it didn't sound so scary. So that's one thing. And the other thing I've done is I encourage people to sign up for an email newsletter after my sessions, because then I email them insights and reflections on things in the news through the lens of what we've talked about. Turns out there's lots to talk about gerrymandering these days, like all sorts of things. And so another measure I've used is open rates of those substantive emails to see. And it'd be great to hear what other people do for trying to figure out impact, but those are some things to get you thinking.
Great, well thank you everybody. So now we have some time that we set aside for you all to ask us questions, collectively or individually.
Yeah.
This is actually for you, Eve. But all of you. So, to put out those impact surveys, or how successful are they? How many people respond to them afterwards? Do you feel like you get, the kind of responses you want?
So I find that if you hand them something in the room, you get a much better response than if you email them later. And when I hand them things, I get almost everybody to respond in some way. And if you make it really short, really simple, checkbox places, then with also some comment areas, you get even more. But when I did it with the New Hampshire Humanities, they wanted to send it by an email. The response rate was much, much lower. And they had, I sort of felt, more laborious questions.
Yeah.
My question's about accessibility and engagement. I find that if you have an event that has an environmentalist or social justice theme, you end up with, not that much in terms of debate, more preaching to the choir of people who are already engaged in these topics. So how do you address that? Anyone?
So when I started this practice, I was living in a place that was not very environmentally friendly, central Illinois, and also working specifically in different kinds of galleries and art spaces. You don't have that preaching to the choir situation. I've actually had people very angry at me about what I was doing. I've had people really rejecting what I was doing. And so I developed a lot of strategies, and humor is the one that cuts through, truly. And I would have somebody, I actually one time in an exhibition, I had a guy who I thought was going to punch me because of my work with starlings, because he was a farmer and he was really angry about the animals. And he was hands on hips, coming at me aggressively, and by the end, we were laughing together. So, it's just a matter of kind of like finding a way through that and don't engage with the anger and just try to kind of say, you might not agree, but there's always some kind of common ground. There's something that you can offer to them of, well, have you thought about it this way? And not everybody, obviously we live in a time where people can't hear that.
So what got them to show up to that event?
I honestly don't know. I think it was just looked like a fun thing in their community. I mean, I don't do that kind of surveys for my shows. I just show up and do what I do.
I'm going to also just respond. I think that's a great question. Most of the time when I'm doing public events, there is a common view, and so it's not something I experience a lot, but I have historically facilitated lots of conversations where that wasn't the case. I think asking questions, and then also kind of your question, like, why are you here? What interests you? Like finding those common grounds, and then because I'm usually doing participatory 2D art, is like, what is a way that, with what is important to you, that you can do something that matches what we're doing and create something that feels meaningful for you. So like, I'm not really engaging. I mean, I always draw the line of something like, not okay. But people sometimes just don't agree on different levels, and so kind of having them also being open to listening to things, but trying to use the art as a way of having conversations together.
I was wondering, so you were starting to say something about people shutting down emotionally when talking about like hard topics, and just like being in college and like seeing people my age like being so distracted by their phones. And I mean, there's lots of other people in older generations who just choose to live more blindly to the problems in our world. Like, how do you guys, like on a personal level, sort of like cope with the sort of like, I don't like finding hope and just like using that to fuel your practices? Obviously, like talking and joining with people that feel the same and will speak on it is very important, but like it's kind of disheartening how money really does like drive a lot. And just like with lack of science and education funding right now, it's just like, it seems like a lot. I don't know, it's kind of a heavy question, but I'm curious.
Yes, definitely very, very heavy question. So I find hope by doing the work. I mean, that is why I do it. And when I get somebody who comes to one of my sessions who's just kind of sitting in the back, just sort of curious, and they come up to me later and they say, I never knew how gerrymandering worked, or I never knew XYZ. That's when I feel like, okay, I reached somebody. And if I just have one of those in each session, I feel good. Maybe that's a tiny, tiny measure, but I do think of the ripple effects. And I had one day where there was a woman who came. This was the quietest session. But she said, I came because I want to be able to speak to my relatives in South Carolina more knowledgeably about what's going on. It's like, okay.
So, what did you tell her?
I mean, the whole session was about how does mail-in voting work? What are voting machines? These are non-partisan mechanics. How do the systems work? What is majority voting? What is ranked choice voting? Like, why you should not be scared of these things, and why some of these things are true improvements, and I don't say that's misinformation, don't believe it, but giving them the actual basis. And I do have the credential of having been a lawyer for state government, so that I can speak knowledgeably.
Thanks for the question. I think there was a two-part question there. The first part was like being on your phone all the time and being inundated with information. The second part was knowing a lot and keeping hope. And so the first thing I do is I try to really navigate where I'm getting my information, how much, and like some days I can take more, some days I can't, but really thinking about where I'm getting that and then letting kind of if I'm on my phone, kind of have other aspects. And so just kind of being really mindful, and it's a practice, it's not easy. And then the second was exactly what you said, it's just doing the work. And so sometimes for me, it gets to be too heavy and I'll just start printing something. That's where a lot of this came from, especially when printmaking practice. A lot of it is just a coping skill or coping method. And like I think even in the program for today, right, they were like just thinking about artists hands-on and having to do something, and that's why I make art, is because of everything I said. So, and when I'm doing that, I'm either inviting people into what I'm doing or I'm making things and putting them out in the world. One of the ways I've been starting to think more and more about my work as interventionist, and so putting things in public spaces to kind of intervene where we're thinking, getting people to think differently, or just kind of have an aha. So there's a lot of things I didn't talk about, but I think it's just doing the work and trying to figure out ways to connect with people, and also trying to put some hope in the world. But also the other thing is being in community is really, really important, and not being isolated.
Thank you for those questions. Jen and I both teach at university level, so we think about this constantly, I'm sure, a lot of people do. Keeping people from just engaging with the world through the phone is the only way to do that, is to give them something to look away from the phone for, right? You just got to take that out of the equation. It's the only way. And I tell my students, I try to engage them. I mean, I do this through my art practice, but also as a professor. But I was like, I don't care what you do something. Don't be a passive observer, right? So then I give them a lot of examples and opportunities to do that specifically. And again, I do that both through my art practice and through my teaching. And you just eventually, and yeah, a lot of the stuff, I speak directly to it, especially with my students and through my projects. I speak directly to the sadness, I speak directly to the loss. You have to do that. If you try to go about it in another way, it's not true. And it's very important to be truthful. And so you say, yes, it's depressing, yes, it's dark, yes, it's upsetting, but you are not powerless. And then if you give, again, it's a sense of personal agency, even small, and I say, there are more than 8 billion people on the planet. Yeah, this little action is not doing anything, but every single thing that I'm modeling is scalable. So if you get, half of 8 billion people to do something, that's real change.
How much time, is that loud? How much time do you spend letting people know that your project is where it is? How much time do you spend, in marketing and, how much time? I need an answer because I spent my life as an installation artist, and I was always dependent on the nonprofit galleries to run the press releases, and now all that stuff is gone, and I find myself having to do it. And monkey mail, I know it's called MailChimp, but I call it monkey mail. You have to expect someone to open it. So how much time do you spend?
I have a super quick,
Okay.
probably unhelpful answer.
Too much and never even remotely enough.
Yeah.
Okay, it really varies. It varies on the project, it varies on the audience, there's so many variables.
Right.
So there's not like one answer. I will say one of the most important things is repetition. The more people see it, the repeated nature of that, the more it's gonna, you put it out there once and nobody shows up. Even if you're just putting it out there every day in some way, even if it's annoying, the repetition is gonna get into people's minds, and they're gonna somewhere it's gonna dig in there and remember to do this, or if they're on the fence about something, and they're like, oh, maybe I should go, maybe I shouldn't go, and then they see it again. It's a repetition. There's no one answer, but I find that that's one of the most important things.
Okay, so you mean repetition, what, through emails or?
Email, social media, whatever you're doing, postering, whatever ways that you're doing that. I know we don't want to bug each other with too many because we're all on too many threads, social media, whatever. But if you're just putting it out there,
people are going to see it, and that's really important.
As a creative practitioner, you cannot be shy about talking about what you're doing.
Oh, no,
You
I
just can't be, and
understand that.
especially, that's particularly hard I found in New England culture. It was hard in Midwestern culture, because you're not ever supposed to promote what you're doing. You're not supposed to talk about yourself. I happen to be from Long Island, where people did that way too much. I'm not like that so much, but you just have to. People will not know. You know, art is inherently a public thing. Art is not art if it's not public, in my opinion. How do you make it public? You have to, you know, like people have to see it. If you're making the greatest work in the universe in your basement where nobody sees it, in my opinion, it ain't art.
And then the only other thing
Can I just tap on what Brian said really quick? I just want to add that for women and people socialized as women, it's particularly hard to do that, and it's just taken a lot of time to work through that and all those things, and have somebody who can help you work through, like get through the voices that are telling you shouldn't publicize yourself.
And then the other part of that is choosing who you're collaborating with and talking to that collaborator about what is their publicity plan and making sure that they are doing all of the pieces. But I won't do my project with just a neighborhood group or a teeny tiny library unless they tell me, okay, we're going to do it as a group of libraries in the Mad River Valley and all three of us are going to publicize it together. Then it's worthwhile. Because the people in that area don't know who I am, but they know who the library is.
There's a question. It's more just of I'm a recovering publicist. Hi there, Alia, recovering publicist. And so a couple thoughts, and also now moving more into the creative space, is that looking at it as an opportunity for you to have some fun and inject your creativity into the marketing. I know it's asking a lot of artists, but if you reframe it of instead of how much do I have to do, what do I get to play with? I forgot my business cards this morning, so while I was listening, I cut up some business cards and wrote my information, thinking, oh, that's also something marketing that you can be doing, having fun with it, bringing your creativity. And also the network component of finding other people who would see value in it and then giving them the tools to speak for you or to spread the word. Fish where the fish are is also a good metaphor, so that then those people can spread the word for you. And also maybe find someone who likes to be creative with the publicity, but not necessarily that's their main artistic contribution, but you can outsource and play and publicist over.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We're going to start at, we have 15 minutes, and we want to make sure you get some hands-on time. So we're going to transition to the back of the room, where you're going to have a chance to make yarn citizens and seed balls and postcards. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
More questions from